want to welcome you to Adoption Matters, a podcast with real people sharing real stories and getting real about adoption from all three perspectives of the adoption triad. I'm Sally Ankerfelt, an adoptive parent and part of Growing Intentional Families Together, and I'm here along with my colleague Gayle Swift, also an adoptive parent. Together today, we're going to explore another interesting and sometimes difficult topic, and we're going to share frank conversations guided by our commitment to truth-telling and truth-seeking. So in each episode, those of you who have listened before, we discuss important issues using adoption-attuned principles to help us navigate some of the most sensitive issues with grace and respect. Together, we seek to model courageous communication and help create a community where anxiety can be reduced and a mutual understanding can prevail. So whether you're an adoptee or a birth parent or an adoptive parent or a member of the adoption constellation in some way, we're really excited that you are here and that we can share our stories and insights and support. So thank you for joining Adoption Matters today. And like I said earlier, you may notice we have a different configuration of hosts today. Gayle Swift, and she's an adoptive parent, and I am Sally Ankerfelt. So Gayle, you want to go ahead and introduce? I'm excited about our guest today.
I would love to introduce Elizabeth Barbour. Elizabeth is a life coach. She's also a shamanic practitioner, a speaker and author who brings both professional wisdom and lived experience to her work with women navigating life's biggest transitions. An adopted person, she's been reunited with her birth family for 26 years and has 11 half-siblings. She's also an adopted mom, and her family is in reunion with their daughter's birth family. Elizabeth weaves self-care, ritual, and storytelling into her coaching to help others find solid ground amidst grief, identity, and transformation. She's the author of Smart Self-Care for Busy Women and Sacred Celebrations, which I've read. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. And is currently writing a book about adoption reunions. Learn more at www.elizabethbarbour.com, and that's Barbour. Welcome, Elizabeth. It's wonderful to have you here. We're so glad that you're willing to join us. And of course, we acknowledge that it's not easy to reveal the details of your personal life. So we invite you to share the parts of your story that you do feel comfortable sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great to be here and good to meet you, Sally, and to see you again, Gayle, since we had a chance to talk a few months ago. So do you want me to just start by sharing a little bit about my story? Okay. All right, great. So I am a reunited adoptee. I was raised in Connecticut as an only child. I was born in 1970, so I was part of that baby scoop era. Raised by mom and dad, and had a fairly normal growing up. Although I will say, I was just talking to another adoptee a few hours ago on another call, and we both figured out that we were both adopted people, and we were both raised as only children, and we were both adult children of alcoholics. We both had parents who were alcoholic, and we're like, wow, if that isn't like the triple whammy, I don't know what is. So we had an interesting conversation, but so yeah, and always knew I was adopted. Didn't know anything about my birth family because, of course, that was the closed adoption era. And in 1999, I reunited with my birth family. It's actually kind of an interesting story. Do you guys remember the television show ER?
Oh, yes.
Okay. They had a storyline about Carrie Weaver, who was the redheaded doctor. And they had a storyline where she was adopted, and there was a woman who had come into the hospital, and they thought that that was her biological mom. And it turned out in the storyline, I think that actually wasn't the right placement, but I'll never forget the line she said, which was, I always thought that when I found my birth mom, I'd have time to get to know her. And now she's dying. That the woman in the character in the show was dying. And so she had this sense of urgency. And I had gotten a private investigator's phone number from a friend of mine, but hadn't acted on it. And I dug out that phone number the next morning and called. And then that woman found my birth mom within 48 hours.
That's amazing. And that was basically before the internet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That was back in the late 90s. So, yeah, so that's how, and then when I found my birth mom, learned that she had 3 children, and asked her if she knew, what she knew about my birth dad. She said, oh, he works for my cousin, when you're ready, she said, I haven't talked to him in 30 years, but when you're ready, I know how to find him. And so she called him for me. And then once he called me and, I asked him, are you married? And does your spouse know about me? And, do you have children? And he said, only 8. So, and my birth mom had told me she had 3 children. So I went from being an only child to being the eldest of 12. Wow. Yeah. So
it's pretty startling.
Yeah. So I have been really, really fortunate. I have had pretty much a fairy tale reunion. I have had love and acceptance and welcoming from every single member of my biological family. And even though my adoptive dad was deceased by the time I searched, my adoptive mom was super supportive until her death. And she met my birth mom several times, maybe 6 or 7 times over the 20 plus years, and had always been very loving and supportive. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but I feel like my reunion with my birth family allowed me to be closer with my adoptive mom, because it gave me answers about myself. So I was more settled into, sort of who I was and how I was operating in the world, and could have a different connection with her.
And isn't that ironic? Because so often people fear it will put a wedge between them instead of bringing them together as a bridge.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of fear. And, of course, and we know that, right? Like the whole system is built on grief and loss and trauma and separation and secrecy and lies. And, there's so many layers and so much complexity to it. But my mom I give her so much credit back in the day of just being like, yep, you're adopted and we love you. And we know there's a young woman out there who thinks of you every year on your birthday, and she probably loves you to pieces. And so she was thrilled when I found my birth mom. So I was really fortunate. And then, oh, go ahead, Sally. Did you have a question?
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll just add the other part of the story then. So, so me becoming an adoptive mom. So I had been married, to Eric for many years, and we tried having a family, and, infertility, like many adoptive couples, IUI, IVF, pregnancy, miscarriage, the whole 9 yards. And so we ended up adopting Riley through a private adoption. I won't go into the details of the story, but, it was one of those very divine intervention kinds of things that we learned about her and her arrival. And she's just precious. So, we brought her home, met with her birth mom in the hospital very soon after she was born, spent lots of time with her in those first few days, and then brought Riley home straight from the hospital, and kept in touch. We had an open adoption with her birth mom for about 2 years, and we kept wanting to invite her to be part of our lives, but it was more texting and emailing. And then when Riley was about 2 years old, her birth mom dropped contact with us, which was a little bit sad. Well, not a little bit, a lot of it sad for all of us, because we really had envisioned having an ongoing open adoption. But I have my sense is that it's just been too painful for her. And I just hope and pray someday that, that she'll come around and be able to be part of our lives, and particularly, our daughter's life. So then in 2020, when our daughter was 9 years old, we had done ancestry DNA, like so many people during the pandemic, like, oh, we're bored. What are we going to do? Let's spit in a tube and find out our ancestry, because none of the 3 of us in the house, Eric and Riley and I, none of us were related to one another. So we thought, well, this will be fun, and let's have some fun with this. And we discovered that Riley's biological dad um, was someone different than who we had been told that it was. And so he didn't know that he had fathered a child. And so we did not say anything. We just let it sit. Um, that was Christmas, I guess, of 2019. And then on April 1st of 2020, we were contacted through Ancestry by, turns out to be Riley's grandmother. And she said, hey, I see that your daughter's in our family tree. Can you help me understand? And I said, well, I think your son is her dad. So, and it's been great. He lives in Atlanta and is married with a young baby of his own that they are raising. And so Riley now has a little half brother, which is wonderful. And we see them a couple times a year, and it's been really positive and loving. So,
as you watch your daughter knowing her birth family at a very young age, how do you compare that with your own experience?
Gayle, I cry every time I see her with them because I'm crying just thinking about it because I'm so happy for her. I mean, I'm so happy for her because when she's with them, it's like she's with her people. I mean, and I'm her people too, and our daddies are people too, but those are her people. And I see her with them the first time we met. The first time we met Matt, he's young and fun and full of life and super playful. And so is Riley. She is just like that. And we went hiking together. And I remember there was one time we were in Asheville, although we weren't living here at the time, but that's where we met the first time. And we were out hiking, and the two of them were up on this distant rock, and they started like dancing together, and they made like this little dance routine. They looked exactly alike. Like she's like his little mini me. And it's just so precious. She's so happy. And so for me, I am just so grateful that she's having a different experience than I did. I didn't see anybody who looked like me or that I was related to for almost 30 years. So for her to be growing up, she's having a different sense of herself and a different sense of her body. Especially for me, I had a lot of body image issues because I was different than my parents, and she's different than us. Obviously, I mean, obviously, some are more obvious than others. But so for her, it's just been so healing. So I celebrate it all the time.
It's if for a few minutes we can put ourselves in the other person's shoes and imagine what we would want if we were them, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I would want to know all those answers. I would want to know about my people.
For sure. I mean, and that's an interesting thing you said, Gayle, because like, I think that's one thing we can do in these conversations is help people get into somebody else's, see their perspective, see their perspective. Yeah. So Elizabeth, what would you want to say to people? Like if you could say something to the public, and then if you could say something to adoptive parents, first parents, and adopted people, like what would you say? I'm sure there'd be some different answers there.
Yes. Yeah, that's yeah, that's a big question, certainly. No pressure. I think, I mean, there's so much to say. It's like how to be concise about it. Specifically about reunion, maybe let's focus in on that.
Reunion, yeah.
It's really complex and it's not one size fits all. I think sadly, we tend to glorify adoption reunions. It's on Oprah and, all of the talk shows. It's like, oh, look, we're going to bring these families together and isn't this great? And isn't it wonderful? Yes, it is. And what caused that was tremendous pain and trauma and loss and separation. And we've lost sight of that. And I think the general public, if you will, talking to people in general, I don't think they understand the depths of the trauma that all triad members experience in one way or another. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. And also I think that reunions in particular are not one size fits all. You know, I have a very unusual story in that everybody's on board. Everybody is good. I mean, sure, you know, have we had issues? Absolutely. But no more than any other family or any other, you know, healthy relationship, right? Like where you're going to talk and you're going to engage and you're going to disagree and you might have a fight and you might be upset about things, but then you work through it, you know, if you have healthy communication. But I think that so many reunions are not that straightforward. Sometimes you might just reunite with one parent and not both. Sometimes you might reunite with siblings and not with parents. Maybe you'll find when you search, especially if an adopted person is searching, they might find that their parents have passed on. You know, and we'll talk about this later, but the book that I'm writing, I remember I interviewed a gentleman in his 70s. He was a retired physician in Houston. And he had just found his siblings. I think he was like one of 5 kids. And he had just found them about 5 years ago. He said, man, Elizabeth, if I had known how great this was going to be, I would have done it so much sooner. Because he was just having a ball getting to know his adult siblings, you know, who were all in their 60s and 70s now. So I think there's that. I think specific messages to people. You know, we were talking earlier about for adoptive parents. I think to just remind adoptive parents that just because your child finds their birth family and wants to have a relationship with them doesn't mean that they love you any less. And it doesn't mean that you're any less family or any less connected. And in fact, as I would just reiterate, for me, it ended up being a really positive thing because I was able to appreciate my adopted mom so much more for what she gave me. So I would say that I think to first parents, I would say to just remember that in fact, I was just talking to, I think I told you, I was talking with another adoptee earlier today, and we were talking about first parents and how they carry so much guilt and shame. But in many cases, certainly not all, adoptees were just like happy. We just want to know you. Like, you know, maybe are we angry a little bit in some cases and in some a lot. But in many cases, it's like, you know what, you were a product of the system. You were a product of the times. You didn't really have many choices. You know, have you all read Gretchen Sisson's book Relinquished?
I have.
Yeah. So it's incredible. I highly recommend it to all of your listeners. Relinquished by Gretchen Sisson. It came out last year, and she interviewed 100 women who relinquished children for adoption over, I think she interviewed them over like a 20-year period. And out of those 99 out of 100, only the 99 out of 100 only considered either abortion to terminate their pregnancy or parenting to raise their child. They never considered adoption. So adoption is not typically a first choice. It's not like, oh, I'm pregnant, maybe I'll place my baby for adoption. It doesn't work that way. Because it's against the natural order, as we all know. And then who else haven't I spoken to? Oh, adoptees. yeah, people like me. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things I would say to adopted people is to say that, you know, regardless of how your reunion goes, you are still whole and complete just as you are. You know, I think we all have this desire, and we do. I mean, we walk around. I certainly did for many years, feeling like, oh, you know, I don't really know who I am, and you know, I'm missing all these pieces. And reunion absolutely was healing and helpful for that. But even if it didn't go as well as I wanted to, and even if I didn't have a relationship, I am still whole and complete just as I am. So, yeah, it's complex stuff, though, for sure.
Well, you know, one of the things I noticed when my son reunited with his birth mother, which was a tremendous blessing, tremendous. That was when he first began to appreciate what he had lost and what he had missed. You know, with all that joy, there was this amazing amount of, oh God, now it's real.
Mhm.
And I could have known all these people. I could have been part of their lives. Yeah.
Yes, it's so true, Gail. Last summer, I had the chance to go on vacation with my three siblings from my birth mom.
Oh, wow.
And we went on vacation with us and partners and children all together. It was like total mayhem. I had never experienced anything like that before. And we had visited each other, of course, over the years, but we'd never actually just gone on vacation, the four siblings plus all the kids. And I came home and I think I cried for like 2 or 3 days because it's, as you said, like I was just missing, like, oh, I missed out on this. I missed out on growing up with these people who are loving and kind and hilarious and, a pain in the butt sometimes, especially my brothers. Love you guys. If you ever listen to this. But, but it's that notion, yeah, like what you miss. But then I also think of the same. It's like, but I had so many opportunities as an adopted person, and as an only child, I got to travel and do things that, I'm not sure I would have been able to given a different life circumstance. So it's really complex.
It's just another one of those both ands that
Yeah.
adoption is so overladen with.
Yeah.
And
I
they
think
always
too
coexist.
for adoptive parents, I think there's kind of this feeling of fear around um the well, I'll speak for myself. Like I think I might have been worried like if if my kids have a lot of contact with their families, how disruptive might that be to them if because there's this unknown, and I know that for many people there is kind of this ebb and flow of contact or not contact, of also seeing one of my children, it's seeing the what's happening in the life of their first family that they're not a part of. And this is all happening while my child is growing and becoming a teenager and all these things. And we watch that and we're thinking, is this even a good thing? Right. But then the important thing I think to remember is the best time for all of that is when they are with us, when they're in their families, when they have people around them who can if we're open to it, we can hear their pain, we can hear their joy, we can hear the connection, we can hear the times of disconnection, and we can be there.
Mhm.
And instead of, let's say, some parents might say, well, I'm going to wait until my child is older, like 18 or something.
Right.
And then we'll start sharing more information, or then we'll make sure there's a meeting. Well, then that's maybe potentially outside of the home. The process may be even more complicated.
Mhm.
I think I like to know what you think about those dynamics and what I'm saying, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. And I've actually been really grateful that we did meet Riley's birth dad when she was only 9,
Mhm.
because we've really been able to be a part of that process. And I guess I had the leg up, perhaps on some other adoptive parents, that I'm a reunited adoptee myself. So I kind of knew what to do. I knew how to approach it. I knew how to do things very slowly, very carefully, very intentionally. I knew to give us all space and time to process. I remember when we scheduled the first visit, it was a couple months after the first phone call. And then when we got together, we made sure we didn't stay in the same space. We had he had his own house, we had our own rental house, and then we came together for a few hours at a time, and then we'd separate for a few hours, and then we'd come back together. And, so I orchestrated the whole thing because I knew what my own experience was like and how mind-blowing it is.
Well, it sounds like you had clear boundaries and expectations.
Yes,
And we
yes.
did the same thing too, where so our child knew it was going to be an hour the first time, it was going to be at a restaurant. This was all agreed upon. Yeah. And then we all went, one to the hotel, one to our house, um, and so forth. Because, yeah, that, even just that, being able to plan it out and have the structure around it, and to be open to having contact as soon as possible, too, because I have heard anecdotally of families where kids are getting on Facebook or Instagram. They're doing their own research, they're doing their own discoveries, and that makes it harder to be able to be the support that we want to be as parents. And to be able to have, because it can be hard, and it is hard. I know it was hard for one of my children, as much as it was hugely healing. It was difficult to start
Mhm.
contact. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. And I think one of the benefits of doing it when they are younger is that you do have that parental support and
Yes.
guidance and people who can walk you through it. I mean, I was 29 when I met my birth family. And I remember not only thinking, but saying out loud to a lot of people, like, I'm not old enough for this. I'm not ready. I was a fully grown adult, was married, had a good career. But I was like, I'm not old enough for this. I'm not ready for this. And so when you do it younger and you can have parents who can give guidance and love and support and structure, I do think that's a benefit when it's healthy for everybody, and that's always the key, right? Like you got to keep your kids safe and you got to have the clear communication. I love your phrasing. I heard courageous communication. I mean, that's just so necessary in all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say to adoptive parents that are start out with open adoption and then say, but the child is so upset after they have a visit, it's not good for them. I think we should suspend contact.
Mm.
So it makes me think of divorce, kids of divorce who visit their their other parent, and those visits are challenging and traumatic and still important. So could you draw any parallels in that regard, or might you?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that, obviously it's going to be on a case by case basis. I'm not sure I would necessarily agree with suspending contact unless it was an abusive type thing. But changing it, switching it up, dialing it back, getting help. I think so often we tend to go into reunion and reconnection with family without support, without a plan. I
Yeah.
mean, in this book that I'm writing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in a little bit, but I've been interviewing a lot of people, including you, Gail, who have experienced reunion. And I can't tell you, I haven't run the numbers, but I would say it's probably 75% of the people I've interviewed. It says, we didn't have support. We just kind of figured it out on our own. Maybe I read a book or maybe I talked to my best friend or whatever, but there was no membership in groups or organizations. A lot of times people didn't have a therapist or a coach. They just kind of figured it out blindly. And I think that can uh, lead to more problems, honestly, which is a big part of why I'm writing this book. I want to help give people a roadmap and ideas for that.
Yeah.
So to your question, Gail, I would say, it's going to depend on the situation, but I do think changing it up is sometimes necessary. So.
For
Well,
sure.
and I
And
think,
even maybe finding people who are, if it doesn't feel safe or something for one person in that birth family, maybe there is somebody there that where the contact can be made. And Gail, I interrupted you.
well, I was just going to say that I think the fact of the matter is sometimes even though things are hard, it's still beneficial. And recognizing even though the kids might be distressed, they're working through a lot of grief and loss.
Yes.
And of course they're going to maybe show that in their behavior, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that should be the motive for closing an open adoption.
Yes, exactly.
For sure. So maybe you could share a little bit more about your book, because I can't believe we've already talked it for a good chunk of time. And I do, after you share about your book, I do want to ask you just real quick about um, what you would recommend for like ritual. You talk about ritual.
Mhm.
So I'm not being a responsible coach right now because I just stacked the question. So I just did 2 questions at once. So anyway, the first thing is, do you want to say any more about your book and the second thing that you're writing? And then the second thing, just a little bit about if you can give us maybe a hint of what a good ritual might be.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I can tie it all together.
Okay.
So if I may, I'm going to show the book that I have just written. So Sacred Celebrations, which Gayle kindly mentioned earlier. The subtitle is Designing Rituals to Navigate Life's Milestone Transitions. And so it's really about designing rituals to help us navigate those big events in life, whether it's, getting married, getting divorced, losing a loved one, bringing a baby into the family. Adoption certainly is part of that. I tell a little bit of our story in this book. And then it's also the more daily transitions of life, sitting around the table and having grace with your family at the dinner table, or creating an ancestral altar if you have loved ones who have passed on, and having their photos and putting up flowers and candles in remembrance, things like that. So that book came out about 1.5 years ago, and I've been talking with a lot of people in the adoption community about how we can have rituals be part of our experience in all the different ways that adoption shows up. So maybe it's about a first parent who is grieving the loss of their child and missing them, and perhaps lighting a candle every year on their birthday, or writing them a letter, or maybe having a little mini altar in their home with photos or updates, especially if they're in touch with the adoptive family. Certainly for the adopted person, it can be anything from, making a special deal about birthdays, or, honoring your first family if you know anything about them or you have a relationship with them. In reunion, for me as an adopted person, when my birth mom and I celebrated our 10-year reunion anniversary, we did a big trip. We went to St. Augustine, Florida, and blew it out, spent lots of money, and, ate lots of good seafood, and did the art walk, and we just had time, the two of us, which we had, honestly, I'm not sure we'd ever really had, because there were always other people around, spouses and kids and siblings and whatever. And then for our 20-year, we did it as well. So we went to, actually we came to Asheville. I wasn't living in Asheville at the time, but we came to Asheville and spent a weekend in the mountains, and just enjoyed being one-on-one. So that was kind of our ritual for that. And then certainly for adoptive parents, who want to welcome a child into the family, gotcha day celebrations are really popular. I know one of the women I interviewed for my book, who's a dear friend, they had adopted their daughter from China, so they had gone internationally. And when they were there, they got the kids, so they had twin boys, and then they went and adopted a little girl. And so after they were all leaving and heading back to the hotel, they stopped and they got vanilla ice cream, like the real soft serve, the kind that's really easy to lick and is really yummy. And so every year on her gotcha day, they get the kids together and they all have their vanilla ice cream cones. I mean, and it's such a simple, such a simple, really not a big deal. A lot of people wouldn't think, but it's a tradition. It's an honoring. It's a remembrance of this was the time that our family came together and, expanded, and, we added someone new to the family. So those are some ideas. And then, so just so you know, so the book then that I am working on now, the next book that I'm writing, that I referenced earlier, I don't have an official title. My working title is Living in Reunion. And it's all about building healthy, long-term relationships for people living in reunion. So I'm still in the process of interviewing folks. So actually, I'll just share, if any of your listeners have a reunion story, good, bad, challenging, whatever, I'd love to hear it. I'm interviewing not only triad members, but then also adjacent folks too, spouses, grandparents, siblings, children of, because, I've talked to a lot of people who are like, yeah, well, my mom was adopted. And I'm like, oh, well, I was the one who started researching my family history because my mom didn't know it. And I wanted to know because I was getting ready to have my own family. So, there's so many other people who are impacted that aren't just the triad members. So that book I'm working on and doing lots of interviews and research for that, and hopefully that'll come out in 2026. So.
Well, Elizabeth, this has been wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, it has.
Gayle, is there anything you want to add before we close? I really appreciate.
I really appreciate Elizabeth's honesty. It takes courage. It's not easy to bear your private information. It does benefit so many people, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Well,
and sharing. One thing we're really working on at our company is to honor people's experiences and their view of their experience. And I think that being able to hear yours and honor that and celebrate it as well, because like you said, it sounds like that reunion was wonderful, and that trip, and can give some wonderful information to people as well as and ideas there. So thank you very much. And that book sounds awesome too, the one that you're writing. I think it's
Indeed,
it's
very
gonna
much
reach a
needed.
lot of people. Yeah. Well, we
Thank
want to
you.
thank everybody here for watching or listening to Adoption Matters, a podcast with real people sharing real stories and getting real about adoption from all three perspectives of the adoption triad. Help others find this podcast by leaving a rating. We'd love that on your preferred podcast platform or on the YouTube channel where the video will be shown. If you'd like more information about growing intentional families together and how our adoption coaches can help you and your family, sign up for a free connection call at giftfamilyservices.com, or just get in touch with Gayle and I in our Contact Us page. We've really enjoyed being with you, Elizabeth, and we've enjoyed having everybody else join us today. We invite you again to come back next time for another episode of Adoption Matters.
Thank you.